Hi, everybody. You can hear me, right? I'm going to start right away because we already have a delay, and I didn't factor in my own introduction because the schedule is already very tight. Just want to let you know that we're organizing this as part of the Housing Solutions platform that gathers PAN, SAFAP, Housing Europe, and Habitat for Humanity. And we're discussing today the issue of informal settlements in relation to rehousing policies. That will be our focus, but we will also have one presentation that will provide an overview of approaches that deal with upgrading and regularization of settlements. I'm just gonna give the floor to Sarah, who has the first presentation with an overview of the situation in France with the slum clearance program and a case study they have been working on at FAP. And then I will let you know as we go. I will announce the other speakers. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you, Yana. So just to let you know about the situation in France, we estimate that there is 18,000 people living in around 370 or 80 slums. This is quite a lot. And since 2018, there is a mission led by the Interministerial Direction for Housing and Accommodation. We named it DIAL, which is easier. And this mission has been dedicated to the reduction of slum in France, with the idea that it's better to organize support for people as far upstream as possible before evictions, and at the end to completely eliminate informal settlements. This mission is only targeting European national. So therefore, it doesn't concern, for example, the CADE camps or people outside the EU. The budget of this mission is around 8 million euros per year. And these funds are used, for example, to finance civil society organization in the field to support people living in slums. The mission also leads a platform for exchanging practices between stakeholders, and there is some workshops on specific issues like access to water or to air for people, things like that. And for example, he has done a great deal of work on getting children into school. That was a huge problem a few years ago. The latest report of DIAL announced that by 2022, there was 1,200 people rehoused, 3,500 children that had been sent to school, and 1,000 people had found work. So unfortunately, the implementation of these informal settlement policies depends very much on local policies and state representatives at departmental level. And I think that Celia after me will therefore present the downside of this national policy, which despite some efforts is struggling to achieve satisfactory results. I wanted to give you, so as Yaona said, an insight into a project in Montpellier called Montpellier Zéro Bidonville, which means Montpellier Zero Slums, no slums. The city of Montpellier, the metropole of Montpellier has around 10 informal settlements occupied by around 400 people, so it's quite important. And the work of reducing the number of slums on this territory has to be carried out against a backdrop of great tension on the accommodation and housing sector, but also a large stock of vacant buildings, at least temporary. And the aim of this project is to reduce slums in a gentle way. That means without evictions, because there is, as we will see, a lot of evictions in France, and it is a problem to support in a good way people and to find them sustainable solutions. So this project is remarkable for several reasons. The first one is that thanks to voluntary policy on the part of both the state and the Metropolitan Council, everyone living in a slum in this area has received a social support, which is not the case everywhere in France. The civil society organization have coordinated so they can each respond to a need, a special need on the ground, and they organize themselves in a way that complements rather than competes with each other. And it's really important too. Because of the shortage of housing, the organizations have decided to mobilize the vacant stock. As I said, there is a lot of vacant building in the metropole of Montpellier, even it's because we are waiting for some projects to be implemented in 1, 2, or 3 years, or sometimes even more. So they wanted, the civil society organization wanted to mobilize this vacant stock to produce at the first time temporary housing, some temporary housing, and even now some social housing. So to finance this project, they mobilized the EU France Management Authority. In France, this is the region for ERDF and the department for ESF+. And now they have been able to benefit from 1 million euro from the department, and there is some metropolitan projects to reduce sums that were funded with ERDF with the metropole. Today, the project goes even further because the organization 14 is going to renovate a vacant site with the project of auto-rehabilitation with people living in slums, and to create at the end of the project some really social housing designated to those people. There is also, and I think that it's important to notice it, a big partnership with the shelters and the social landlords. For example, there is a committee that brings together all the stakeholders and they study the field of people living in slums to allocate then social housing as a priority. So this project shows us, I think, the importance to involve all the stakeholders. The particularity of this project is that it is not just the city or the state. This is also private funders, such as our foundation, but not only, and also the sector of shelters and the social landlords. Of course, we have to say that this requires a real political will, and this is maybe the worst obstacle before to achieve this policy. We cannot hear you, Yona.
Thank you, Sarah. You were right on time. Now I will give the floor to Celia to present a complementary situation to the one that that Sarah presented.
Yes, thank you. I will address the eviction process, the failures in implementing existing legal frameworks, and the innovative approaches we can adopt to move forward. So before I start, let me make it clear that I talk about the Observatory of Evictions, which has a global approach, which means that when we talk about informal settlements, this includes encampments, shantytowns, squats, or any person forced to live in a vehicle, for instance, and therefore without protection or stability. So I'm not talking about rental evictions, of course. In France, evictions from informal settlements are governed by strict legal frameworks, but these protections often fail in practice. The eviction process should follow several steps. First of all, every eviction should begin with a legal action initiated by the landowner or public authority. The people living in the informal settlement must be informed that there is an ongoing procedure against them, which allows them to present their defense before a judge. Social diagnosis should be carried out before any eviction procedure to help residents find suitable housing solutions. And we are convinced that this is the only way to avoid repeating the cycle of evictions. The instruction Sarah talked about from 2018 requires local authorities to conduct social diagnostics prior to any eviction. And these assessments should evaluate the need of individuals, whether for healthcare, education, or housing, and ensure that appropriate support is provided. However, this procedure is frequently overlooked. In less than 80% of cases, no social diagnostic was carried out, and leaving families vulnerable and without guidance after eviction. Then if an eviction is to take place, it must enable occupants to anticipate it, to prepare for their move, to avoid being subjected to violence on the day of eviction, and to ensure that their belongings is not destroyed or confiscated. There are a number of legal protections in this regard, but in practice, they are often bypassed. Any eviction should result in a housing solution, or at least a shelter solution. In practice, these solutions are not systematically afforded, and people who are evicted end up on the streets. Our figures on evictions recorded at national level show that only 15% of cases result in a solution, and most of these involve temporary accommodation, often just a few nights in a hotel. Moreover, the right to emergency shelter, though legally guaranteed, is overwhelmed. This leads to a revolving cycle where families are moved from one precarious situation to another without ever resolving their housing insecurity. That is why it's essential to make living areas safe by guaranteeing access to basic services, water, hygiene, sanitation, but also providing support for people accessing all their rights, health, education, social rights. The work carried out by mediators is a good way of bringing people back to the mainstream. We can say that despite the many challenges, there are promising solutions emerging in some parts of France. One of the most innovative approaches involved the mobilization of vacant land for temporary housing. Cities like Marseille and Montpellier have experimented with transforming unused buildings into a transitional housing projects. These projects offer displaced families a safe, stable environment, giving them time to access essential services and find permanent housing. I can talk about one. For instance, in Marseille, there is a project called the Auberge Marseillaise. It's a place of refuge for 70 women in extremely vulnerable situations, housed in the former Bonneveine Youth Hostel in the south of Marseille. And there is 300 meters from the Prado beaches. The project was launched in March 2021 in the midst of a health and social crisis, and in an unprecedented burst of cooperation between 9 associations involved locally in the fight against precariousness, with the support of the city and the state. And the aim of this experiment is to build a participative living space as an alternative to social hotel, and emergency accommodation center in a public building that is temporarily available. So there is all those initiatives, but they are still limited in scope. So it demonstrates the potential for public and private partnerships to address the lack of long-term housing solutions. To address this, we need to ensure stricter enforcement of existing legal protections, particularly the requirements for social diagnostics, invest in long-term housing solutions with an emphasis on innovative approaches like the mobilization of vacant land, and to continue to advocate for a right-based approach. So the solutions exist. What is needed is a political will, as Sarah said, and also resources to implement them effectively. By working together, governments, civil society, local communities, we can break the cycle of eviction and provide sustainable housing for those in need. Thank you.
Thank you, Celia. Thank you so much. Now we will move on to a project in Ghent, Belgium, to Sophie, that will present an evaluation report of that project.
Okay. Right. So I would like to briefly share what has happened in Ghent over the past years. So given the time constraints, it'll be concise, but if anyone is interested, I can send the extended report I co-authored with my colleagues last year. And my name is Sophie Salmon. I'm finishing a PhD project on migrant homelessness at Ghent University. For a bit of context, Ghent is a city with just under 300,000 inhabitants located in the northwest of Belgium. It's a Flemish or Dutch-speaking city, quite wealthy with a diverse population due to its tourism industry and university. And within the landscape in Belgium, Ghent portrays itself as a progressive, socially minded city that embraces diversity. Since 2009, informal settlements have appeared on the city's outskirts, primarily occupied by Romanian Roma families from the Rakasdia region in western Romania. And these settlements sparked controversy from the beginning, both from a human rights perspective, but more popularly from racist and security-oriented concerns. Over time, this population fluctuated, evolved, evictions occurred, but people would often relocate, sometimes on public land, other times on private property, or they squatted in vacant buildings in between. The informal settlements typically consisted of self-made structures from recycled materials or caravans. It's important to note that this concerns quite a small group, somewhere between 50 and 150 people, but yet the attention it received, both from civil society, the press, and the government, has always been highly exaggerated. The residents of these settlements mostly survived through begging, informal work like metal collecting and seasonal labor, often in agriculture, and school attendance for the children has always been challenging, with also some children spending big periods of time also with other family in Romania. But for nearly a decade, the local government lacked a coherent response, resulting in what was kind of considered a form of tolerance. However, this tolerance was always pressured by a right-wing opposition that advocated for the migrants' return to their homeland and civil society groups that demanded more humane conditions and support. Important to note that this civil society in Ghent is predominantly Flemish and white, with no participation of Roma people themselves. As a side note, so in the city, there is a traveler site for recognized nomadic groups to temporarily live in their mobile homes. However, these Roma migrants never qualified as they are not part of the officially recognized nomadic tradition. However, some do aspire to live on the site because they find it a good solution, especially those traveling back between Belgium, Romania, and other countries. Around 2018, civil society groups became more organized, applying pressure for a solution. At that time, there were two larger settlements of Romanian families, one in caravans and another in self-made houses. And so this was the beginning of discussions within government about the possibility of a kind of project. In 2019, following local elections, a new mayor introduced what became known as the post-mobile policy, marking a radical shift in the city, framed within a discourse on human dignity, human worth. The city announced it would no longer tolerate informal settlements, which would be dismantled immediately upon discovery. For those already living in such conditions, a kind of social compromise was reached, and they would be supported through a 3-year integration project, and all encampments were to be destroyed. Subsequently, in 2019, at one moment, a list was compiled of all individuals living informally who wished to join the project. It was presented as a voluntary project, but the only alternative offered was leaving the country. So as a result, almost all eligible individuals signed up. This also included some individuals who did not belong to this Romanian Roma population, but who lived in parks, tents, or slept outdoors on the street. So over the course of nearly 3 years, the Post-Mobile project aimed to provide housing and support for integration or return. Due to its high costs, it was marketed by the mayor as a solution not only to informal settlements, but also to issues like begging. The project took place at one single location, and local civil society opposed this setting, so they refused to collaborate in the project. Instead, it was carried out by various city services in collaboration with a regional NGO. The project was delayed. Finally, in November 2020, approximately 100 residents moved into the project. Families were housed in containers at a site on the outskirts of the city, away from public view, and significant social work efforts were mobilized. I will now briefly sum up some of the more promising outcomes and then challenges of this project that was concluded last year. So more promising outcomes, the official address and shelter provided a stable environment where meaningful social work processes could take place. Social workers built relationships with people following their aspirations and rhythms, and trust in services and institutions increased significantly. Although this was never the objective of the project, a lot of health issues were addressed and a lot of assistance went into getting people adequate medical care. Through group activities on site, children gained more confidence in their life in Belgium, their Dutch language skills, but also in going to school. It was also a period where the social economy was for the first time explored and successfully explored for those who were very far removed from the demands of the formal labor market, with some residents who had never formally worked before getting permanent contracts in social workshops. And also through official, albeit often temporary seasonal work, people were able to secure residence permits for the first time, granting them access to welfare services. However, the project also shows many challenges and problems. Residents were really treated as objects of the intervention with no involvement in setting the project's objectives. And this lack of genuine recognition of people as political subjects is problematic. The list of people also recorded in 2019 did not reflect the individuals who were present when the project began in 2020. So this created a lot of tensions and problems. People who were not admitted into the project began squatting more or sleeping in cars, as informal settlements were no longer permitted. And they often ended up in more precarious situations than when they were living in the informal settlements. Also, families who couldn't meet the regulations or rules that the project entailed dropped out of the project, and often resorted to squatting vacant buildings or car sleeping also. With these regulations and rules, I'm referring to the rules that existed on the project site, such as no visitors allowed to sleep over, or not traveling outside the country outside of school holidays, or also concerning school attendance of children, or the obligation to attend Dutch classes. So while the project showed promising results, it failed to address core issues such as the inaccessibility of the housing market, the lack of housing options for seasonal workers or circular migrants, and the absence of social protection for those unable to enter the formal labor market. It was, after all, a very short-term commitment. Many children dropped out of school after leaving the project. Even though some people gained resident status and welfare rights, they were at risk because they had now, after the project, lost their address and sometimes employment. Also, and this is...
1 minute, Sophie.
Yeah. As new forms of homelessness became more visible in the city, like the car sleeping and squatting, there was an increased risk of stigmatization. The mayor had promised to invest money to solve the problem, but instead the issue was partially displaced. And some people reasoned that investing in Roma people was just not worth the effort. So I think it's very unclear what will happen next now in Ghent, but I think it's a good example of kind of the failure of quick fixes, but also of the danger of designing interventions without any participations of the communities, which leads to very expensive projects, missed opportunities, and possibly increased stigmatization in the city. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will swiftly move to the next focus, which is the context of rehousing policies in Italy. And I will invite Elisa to start with a presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I have been asked to speak about the role of strategic litigation in ensuring the right to adequate housing in light of the many years of work that Amnesty International spent on this issue in Italy, and of the complaint that we brought before the European Committee of Social Rights. The complaint alleged violations of the right to housing of the Romani community, ex Articles 31 on the right to housing and Article E on non-discrimination of the European Social Charter. The allegations regarded the continued perpetration of forced eviction, particularly of the Roma community, the continued use of segregated and substandard housing for Roma, and the failure to ensure equal access to social housing for Roma through application of direct and indirect discriminatory criteria for the allocation of social housing. The complaint was filed in March 2018, and on 4 July 2019, the committee declared it admissible. And of its own accord, to our surprise, decided to indicate to the government immediate measures to adopt to eliminate the risk of serious and irreparable harm to which persons evicted are exposed, and in particular to ensure that the persons evicted are not rendered homeless, and that evictions do not result in people experiencing unacceptable living conditions. The committee also demanded that all relevant public authorities be made aware of this decision and wanted to be kept informed about the implementation of the immediate measures. This decision of the committee regarding the immediate measures, which were issued at a time when a group of Roma living in the area of Giuliano near Naples was being chased away by the authorities after a forced eviction in very hot weather conditions at the time, was extremely welcome, and we believe that it set the tone about how carefully the complaint was then going to be handled by the committee. In October 2023, the committee communicated to us the decision in which they found unanimously that Italy was in violation of Article E in conjunction with Article 31, paragraphs 1, 2, and 3, and therefore on all counts raised by the complaint. This was a brilliant outcome for us and for the people concerned, especially given that the decision came after a detailed exchanges with the government, which had the chance to provide all the information it deemed relevant to rebut our allegations, but which in the end was regarded as insufficient to dispel our allegations by the committee. The decision was published in May 2024, and we are now waiting for the recommendation of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, which it will make to Italy as a result of the decision. The monitoring of the implementation of the decision by the Committee of Ministers, which could last for years, will offer further opportunities for civil society for pushing the authorities to improve the housing situation of the Roma and eliminate any discriminatory laws and practices. Now, strategic litigation is a pointed tool which can achieve not only justice and reparation for victims, but can also promote systemic changes, unblock situations, and push the authorities to take action. And there are many different arenas and processes to engage in this, some being more impactful than others, and all having advantages and disadvantages. But in our experience, I think we want to share that it's important to recognize that it's certainly not a silver bullet. Particularly in a situation as complex as that of access to adequate housing for the most discriminated community in Europe at a time of austerity in public services, even strategic litigation can sometimes only help to chip away at the problem. But what it does is to raise the stakes, obliging the authorities to take notice and change course. Before filing the complaint at the European Committee, we had already engaged in over 8 years of work on documenting violations experienced by Roma in accessing adequate housing, advocating nationally and internationally for change. And we had engaged in campaigning and media work. We had also supported a national strategic litigation in a case which was eventually won before the Tribunal of Rome to declare a newly built mono-ethnic segregated camp, La Barbuta, a discriminatory form of housing. Our complaint to the European Committee rested on very solid foundations, therefore, and was brought deliberately as a swan song to this work after our organization had decided to move on. We wanted to leave something that could work as a building block for others to stand on. And in the complaint, we also acknowledged that we were ourselves building onto two past decisions in 2005 and 2010, which were substantially similar after complaints brought by the European Roma Rights Center and the Center on Housing Rights and Evictions, respectively. We saw our complaint as a contribution towards a bigger collective strategy to bring down the system of mono-ethnic and segregated camps and of discrimination in access to social housing in Italy. So has this worked? We think that not alone, but taken together with the amount of research and campaigning done by us and by others, this decision, the decision about the immediate measures, the decision of the Rome Tribunal on La Barbuta, have changed the tone of the conversation and has moved the conversation from being between the usual NGOs and the authorities to being a matter for which the authorities have had to answer to courts and to international mechanisms via diplomats. So strategic litigation is a process, and there is a lot of value in the process itself and not just in the final decision. In our case, the 8 years of documenting forced evictions, segregation, discriminatory exclusion from social housing meant that we had a lot of detail to offer in our complaint, which in turn meant that the authorities had to engage in a granular manner with our allegations or be seen to be evasive. And this dynamic...
Sorry, could you please speed it up, wrap it up a bit, Elisa?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, so this dynamic is what we believe was the most important thing. And the other thing which we suggest is always crucial to consider is the time frame. So we lodged the complaint in 2018. The decision was in 2024. It's important to think about who will be on the ground to pick it up and use it once a decision has been delivered. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elisa. And with that, I will give the floor to Diletta and Mariangela from Arci Solidarietà, who are working in Rome and who can provide this update in comparison to the situation you described from 2019. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Thanks to FEANSA for the invitation. My name is Mariangela De Blasi from Arci Solidarietà, an organization based in Rome, which for almost 30 years works in social and cultural promotion for vulnerable people, in particular Roma people and migrant people. We have prepared a short presentation that we want to share with you. My colleague Diletta is sharing the PDF. Oh, okay. So our work alongside the Roma communities in the city of Rome began with the Roma Minors Schooling Project. From its experimental launch in 1992 to its conclusion due to a wicked decision of the Roma municipality in 2015, the project has schooled at least 2 generations of Roma in a dozen of camps and settlements in Rome. These official Roma camps in Rome are authorized settlements established by local authorities to provide housing for the Roma communities. These camps are part of the city strategies to manage housing for marginalized groups. As Elisa Pieri said before, this type of ethnically based housing solution create a clear contradiction because they keep Roma people even more marginalized and separated, reinforcing social exclusion instead of supporting integration. For this reason, and of course due to the living condition of the people inside the camps, it is of fundamental importance to work towards overcoming and closing this settlement. This is a project we are currently engaged in, and now my colleague that speaks English better than me will now present it to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so very quickly to give you an overview of what Mariangela just described, this is the map of the still currently open institutionalized Roma camps in Rome, and we will then present very shortly our experience in Candoni camp, where we are currently working to overcome the camp system. As you can see, in 2017, 4,503 individuals were registered living in the institutionalized Roma camp system, while in December 2022, the total number of people counted were 2,261 people. I will not describe the entire statistics, and then we can give, of course, the slides. So, as Mariangela said, the existence of camps represents a contradiction, as these camps de facto institutionalize marginalization and segregation. We also have to notice that there are informal settlements in Rome, even though, as I will explain, there are no specific measures for that. This is just to give you a very rough ideas of the numbers and the locations. There is a decline in informal settlements, but is also due to evictions and inspections and not really to social policies that are actually solving the issue. In 2021, the last findings is having 1,395 individuals across 130 sites. As I said, there is no specific plan addressing that, and this is, of course, a very bad situation because only general measures are used or criminalizing measures. So, of course, this is not meeting the needs of the people. Coming back to the Piano Rom, so the Piano Rom regards only the institutionalized camps. I will not read everything, but this was just to give you an idea of the statistics coming from the Piano from 2017 and 2021. And at this end of this plan, 295 families were relocated both in public housing system, but also independent housing or other co-housing projects that were supported by the Piano. So this is involved around 1,100 people. Now we are in the framework of the new plan, which is Piano d'Azione Cittadino per il superamento dei campi, so for the overcoming of the system camps. It will be ongoing until 2026. And this is a very quick overview before going to the case study of Candoni. Again, the project encourages a diversified solution, which do not only include public housing, which is very critical in Rome because thousands of people are waiting for the public house to be assigned, but also diverse housing options, also giving making sure that also agreements with third sector entities that are involved in the co-planning tables can be included and supported also through the budget of the project of the plan. Beyond just then, of course, the project is not just about providing the house, but also making sure that the people are helped throughout the entire process, also after the housing solution is found. The overall framework of the plan is the collaborative approach, meaning that we are in a process of co-programming and co-planning. So meaning that also the Candoni project is part of this co-planning, meaning that there are tables that involves different kind of actors, municipalities, schools, health services, and third sector organizations. And Mariangela, you want to give? No. Okay. So very quickly going to the end. So this is the main issue in Rome because thousands of people are waiting for public housing in Rome, meaning that this creates also not only lack of housing for Roma people, but for everyone, but also it exacerbates the struggles of vulnerable populations and creating a fake conditions of war among Kurds, where, of course, then Roma people are again victim of discrimination and exclusion, but also hate speech and so on and so forth. Very quickly, SWOT analysis of our Candoni camp, then we will leave the slides. So I will not be very detailed in all the parts, but this is what we can say so far. Of course, the project is ongoing, so we can provide more figures when the project will be.
Sorry, 1 minute, Diletta, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. This will be the last slides. I will not list everything because I think that you can read, but we can surely say that there are strengths, but there are also a lot of weaknesses and threats to these projects. What we can say is that the holistic approach is very good, the personalized support, the multidisciplinary team, and also the cooperation in between different actors, but also the active presence of social policies and health department, and also the leveraging to skills to make sure that competencies are recognized also in the system of the camps. But on the other hand, of course, the living situations are very, very difficult from the people living in the camp. And well, for the rest, I think we can leave the presentation maybe and also provide answers in case of questions. But this is a little bit the overview. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For sure, we will leave a lot of discussion and details for the Q&A part of the discussion. Now I will give the floor to Manu and Jean, who are here on behalf of the collective La Versione di Jean, and will tell us a bit about the Lungostura Lazio camp in Torino and the rehousing project that the municipality prepared and to what consequences. Thank you. Please, they will talk in Italian. You can go to your Zoom bar at plus and select interpretation if you want to have the interpretation in English, which I will do now. Okay, thank you. Go on.
Hi everybody, I'm Manuela. Noi siamo parte di un
We are part of a collective.
gruppo,
Town of
negli anni
Lungostura
passati.
Lazio in past years.
Torino ha una lunga storia, il
Turin
governo
is
di
a
Torino
very
ha
long
una lunga storia
history
di campi
in government
per Roma e
of
Sinti,
Roma
ha sempre
and Sinti
governato
camps.
attraverso l'istituzione di campi, ha creato il
It
primo
has
ufficio
always
nomadi,
governed
chiamato così,
through the creation of camps, and it has
nel
created the first
1978,
institution for the administration of
e da
camps
lì
in
poi
Italy in
ha
1978.
sempre gestito un numero più o meno
Then
variabile
it
di
has
campi grandi, anche
governed
grandi,
the
principalmente
existence of
provenienti
shanty towns,
all'inizio di...
bigger and smaller. I cannot hear anymore. Ok.
Perché lo sta bloccando? No. Ok, a partire dalla metà degli anni 90
So since the half of the 90s,
inizia una migrazione dalla Romania di
there is
persone
a
rom e non
important
rom,
migration from Romania
povere,
of Roma and
che
non-Roma people who are
cercano un
substantially
posto
poor
dove
people,
stare anche a Torino,
search a
e in
place where to live
particolare
also in
nasce
Turin.
il Platz,
And
appunto
so the
situato in
Platz
Lungostura
is
Lazio,
born. Platz is located in
nella
Lungostura
periferia
Lazio,
nord di Torino,
in the
che
northern outskirts of Torino.
inizia a crescere dall'anno 2000,
And since
dopo
2000,
l'entrata
this
nel
place
2007 della
becomes
Romania nell'Unione
bigger and
Europea,
bigger. After
diventa più
2007,
grande
when
fino a
Romania
contare
enters the
più di
European
2000
Union,
persone.
it arrives to host more than 2,000
Nel
people.
2011
In
il governo
2011,
Berlusconi, in
the
particolare
Berlusconi government,
con un primo ministro della Lega,
there is a
Maroni, dichiara
minister
il
called
cosiddetto
Maroni from
decreto di
Lega,
emergenza
who
nomadi,
implements
in cui
a
tutti i
decree
campi
specifically
in Italia,
targeting nomads,
in particolare in
in
3
which
regioni, ma poi viene allargato anche al Piemonte,
basically
vengono
Roma
paragonati
people
a una
in
catastrofe naturale.
in 3 regions and then in the rest of
dei
Italy,
commissari
living in camps
ad intervenire
are targeted
sui
as
campi,
an emergency. So
facendo
Roma camps are
sgomberi
targeted
o
as
censimenti
emergencies.
o
So
creando
the
nuovi
government
campi.
starts to govern the situation through evictions or through the creation of new camps, basically.
Torino, ad un certo punto, anche il Piemonte viene inserito in questi fondi
So also the
ingenti,
region of
e
Piemonte
nel 2012
is
vengono
put
sbloccati
inside this
5 milioni di
governing
euro
policy.
per,
And
in
for the
teoria,
region of
creare un progetto
Piemonte,
a favore della
5
popolazione
billion
rom
euros are
in Lungostura Lazio,
spent
dove noi siamo
basically
stati molto
to
attivi, ma anche per intervenire in generale in
try
altri campi della città.
and govern the situation of Lungostura Lazio. So the objective was
evoluto dal governo della città in mano al PD, socialdemocratico,
so the project, the eviction of Lungostura Lazio, which has been called La Città Possibile, the possible city, was implemented by the city of Torino, which at the time was governed by the left wing. The idea of this project was to actually evict this Platz, the Roma camp, but representing this eviction as a humanitarian action, actually. So the implementation of this project has been given to the third sector, to NGOs and associations who were selecting people living in the shanty town who were considered better people, the right people, so just a part of the Roma people living in the camp. And they were offering some temporary housing solution for them. For the rest of the people, just police interventions were implemented. So people were repressed, and in the end, only 500 people could go in temporary housing, and all the rest of the people, so more than 2,000 people in total, were actually just evicted through military and police operations. For the 500 people who were included in the project, the NGOs found temporary housing in the private housing market in Torino. So this project was very hypocritical, because they forced people to sign a pact, let's say, a sort of document in which they accepted to go out of the camp and adhere to the project La Città Possibile, the possible city, so a very grotesque name. So people were forced to sign this document to basically destroy their own barrack and accept to civilize, get civilized. They received very few resources in exchange for duties to behave in a civilized manner, let's say. Very few families were put in these private houses, and very few of them could actually continue to stay in these houses, because when the funds were over, for the families it was impossible to pay the rents in the private market, obviously. A part of the families was displaced in social housing, in which the people were actually basically controlled by NGOs and associations. But even in the social housing, the people could not stay in the long term, and they were evicted. The majority of the people who lived in Lungo Stura Lazio was evicted through violence and force by the police in several steps during the second year of the project. A part of the people who were considered good people, but not so good, was forced to accept basically displacement in Romania. So they received an amount of money to basically go away, and they were voluntarily deported in Romania. And in Romania, obviously, the living conditions were not sustainable for them too. We are talking about a Roma camp in which people had been living for 15 years. So people had their whole life in Lungo Stura Lazio. There were teenagers, old people, so also young people going to school in Italy. On the 26th of February 2015, there was the most violent eviction moment. There were also some friends with legal competencies who were there on the day, and they appealed at the European...
Sorry, I apologize. 2 minutes, please, Manu.
Okay.
They appealed to the European Court of Human Rights. On that morning, 60 barracks were destroyed. The whole camp was surrounded by military forces and police. The eviction was temporarily suspended, but then the destruction continued. So within few months, the project was over. The people who were not included in the project went to other camps in Turin.
2016
And in 2016, the city government who had implemented this project
e sono finite in altri campi informali. La giunta perde le elezioni,
loses elections, and so another local government took place, and a new project was implemented, special project for Roma people again. And between 2018 and 2020, all of the Roma camps in Turin were evicted. There was no contact with social services, no contact with third sector, no funds from the state. Basically, we have a shift towards complete violent eviction of all of the shanty towns and also legal camps in Torino. Now the local strategy is to basically prevent people from living in camps together with other people. So people are allowed to live in very small groups and not in big groups anymore. Right now, actually, there are few camps, informal camps in Torino, but many people started to actually occupy popular houses. And right now, the local agency for popular housing is evicting the people who have occupied such houses, which the occupations started actually, especially in the COVID time. So Roma people right now are actually excluded from any kind of housing possibility. So the occupations of these popular houses are actually fundamental for them in order to have a place where to live. And right now there is an institutional and mediatic discourse in which people are represented in a very racist manner as the people who are basically stealing the houses from other poor people. But actually this is absolutely fake. I just go back to the occupation by 70 families who were living in Lungostura, Lazio, of a place, so an illegal occupation that was made in 2015. Such place, which was an ex-military, let's say, house, was previously occupied by other people, and the Roma people in 2015 decided to occupy another part of this military complex, let's say. So we as a collective, we decided to occupy a part of the already occupied military complex. But actually after 15 days of occupation, there was a huge military intervention by military forces and police for the eviction of the Roma people who decided to occupy. So just saying this to show how the police treated differently the first occupiers, who were left-wing occupiers in Turin, and the Roma people who occupied the occupation, who were evicted in 15 days.
Degli ultimi 10 anni. Quindi Torino è una città che sgombera tantissimo.
In Turin, the only policy basically is eviction policies, and we have made a movie which is called La versione di Jean's version, which has been created through a collection of images of the violent evictions inside the Lungostura Lazio camp. And it's a very important memory document to show from the inside what it means to live in a place which is haunted by institutional violence. The project La Città Possibile was described as a project for the Roma people, but actually it was actually a project in which people were forced to destroy their own houses, and a new wave of forced nomadization was implemented in the city of Turin.
Thank you so much. I will have to stop you here, Manu, because we're in a lot of delay. Thank you, and I hope we can follow up on some of this stuff in the discussion part. I will invite now John, who will talk about case study in Portugal and Lisbon.
Hi, everybody, and thanks to FANSA for having me here. I'm just showing some pictures here. So I'm doing a PhD research project on participatory urban policies in some social neighborhoods in Lisbon. And what I'm about to do now is giving a historical perspective on the two main state policies that have been implemented in informal settlements in Lisbon to clear the slums that used to be there until the early 2000s, and kind of compare the 1970s policies with the policy that have been implemented in the 90s and early 2000s. So just to give a little bit of context, Lisbon used to be one of the European cities with the highest number of people living in informal settlements. When the phenomena of informal building peaked between the 50s and the 70s, the total amount of population living in informal settlements was about 6% of the population, about 50,000 people, and with the first the first policy that that really addressed the problems of the informal settlers was implemented after the 1974 revolution that put an end of 48 years of dictatorship. These policies was called SAL, SAAL, and was rooted in the social movement that used to be there in during the fascist period. So with this policy, the socialist government that replaced the dictator basically integrated the social movement into the policy mechanism in order to design the new neighborhoods for informal settlers with them. This mechanism was basically teams of architects, engineers, technicians, social workers that worked together with people living in informal settlements to design the new neighborhoods, new homes for the people. This is a map of the territory in which I'm working, and these were the black and the gray spots are the informal settlements that used to be there, and this was one of the biggest, with roughly 3,000 people living there. The problem with this policy is that it was shut down less than 2 years after its implementation. So out of the 17 neighborhoods that were planned only for the city of Lisbon, only 7 of them were built, and the result is that the new neighborhoods coexisted for decades with the slums. We can see here on the right these the houses built within the SAL project, and and the amount of the shacks that were there. So the impact of the SAL was symbolic more than anything else. Between the 70s and 80s, the housing policies in Portugal shifted towards the indirect promotion of housing. So the Portuguese state abandoned the direct promotion of housing, and also for informal settlers. This resulted in neglecting the condition of informal settlements, and at the same time, during the 90s, Lisbon started to have another role started to have more visibility in the internationally, at least at the European level. For example, in 1994, Lisbon became the cultural cultural capital of Europe, and there has been the International Exposition in Lisbon in 1998. So even though there has been a financialization of housing promotion, and there has been a neoliberal shift in the political economy of Portugal, this project kind of resulted on direct promotion, again, just for kind of hiding the informal settlements to the international community.
2 minutes, John. Sorry.
Sorry?
2 minutes.
Okay, thanks. So this pressure to build houses and to clear slums resulted in a kind of an outdated project, because it provided the construction of massive buildings to rehouse the people, and the violent and non-participative clearance of the settlements, and with an approach that we can also call racist, because all the people that joined the informal settlements during the last from 1993 onwards were not eligible for rehousing, and these were mostly people coming from the Portuguese former colonies like Angola, Mozambique, and Cape Verde, and Guinea-Bissau. So another criticism of this project is that it built houses, but it didn't have to build a city. So these huge neighborhoods were used to concentrate the city poor just in some specific neighborhoods, but at the same time did not provide services like commerce and transport in the neighborhoods. And so in the last years, people are trying to with the new generation of participatory policies, people are trying, among many problems but we don't have time to discuss now, we are trying with the third sector to provide the services and to build cities, to build a city in these neighborhoods that were made just to solve the housing problem, but without considering all the other social issues that were a concern in this in informal settlements. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I really apologize for having to push everybody to be done faster. I'm really sorry. However, now we have a bit of a respite, 5 minutes break. You can grab a coffee, have a glass of water, and we will be back in 5 minutes with the second round of presentations. Thank you. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hi, can you please all reconnect so we can start the second round of presentations? So far we had presentations from France, Italy, and Portugal, and Belgium. So from Western and Southern Europe, and now we are moving towards Central and Eastern Europe with a presentation from Cluj-Napoca, Romania. I think you can go ahead, George, and start. You can also share your screen if you have a presentation.
So, my name is George Iulian Zamfir. I work with Căști Sociale Acum, Social Housing Now, which is a collective on housing rights in Cluj-Napoca, Romania. So, I will describe a little bit a rehousing program and the effects of that. So a little bit about Social Housing Now. First, the last mass eviction of Roma from the city center to the landfill took place in 2010. There were around 350 persons, Roma persons, who were moved by the municipality there. That's just the last big wave. In the area of Pataret, where the new group has been moved, the railroad company pressed people to move some of their improvised houses away from the tracks, but offer no solution, and the municipality offered no solution. So in 2015, that's when we started supporting around 100 families to apply for social housing. And that took place every year so this is the 10th year, and we organize street demos, research, and policy analysis, and many of the things that grassroots housing rights collectives do around Europe. So a little bit about the history of public and social housing in Romania and in Cluj-Napoca. As we all know, in the 1990s, there was a process of mass privatization of state-owned housing, as it was customary in most post-socialist areas. Social housing appeared as a legal category only in 1996. And it's very important that the criteria still states that earners below the average wage are eligible for social housing. And in Cluj, what happened was that there was a bigger project which introduced around 270 new public and social housing units, locally funded in the city, but then the number of new social housing units decreased. So in 2012, 15, and the last one in 2021, so just almost 100 new apartments have been produced by the municipality. In the same time that Cluj enjoyed its most performing economic period in history. So now we have around just 1% of the total housing fund in the city is in public management. And in the meantime, the city turned into the most expensive real estate market in Romania. So there have been some other housing policies in Cluj that I think are important to show here. There was a rent subsidy program, which was a novelty in 2018, and that was offered for 3 years, but in a decreasing manner. So in the third year, just 50% of the total amount, up to around 230 euros, was offered. So we can see this as a means of the municipality to teach people to get used to the rental markets. There are other things that are important in this rent subsidy program. So landlords have to agree to host Roma families, not just Roma families, but we're talking mostly about this now. They have to be willing to register the rental contract, have to agree that the municipality transferred them the money, and also applicants have to do community services if they're unemployed. So just around 150 families from the city actually benefited from the program in a 4-year period. Another housing policy is acquisition of apartments from the market and turning them into social housing. Just 4 apartments have been bought, which also signals that the housing market is a solution. Few words on the social housing criteria, which is generally they've been very discriminatory. We won a case in court in 2019, so we managed to remove the education criteria, which is obviously discriminatory and against the housing law. And also applicants on social benefits gained eligibility. And the municipality added some points for habitation in informal settlement later on, but no points are still available for housing conditions. So whenever we ask or we demand new social housing to be produced, they say, we have, the municipality says, we have Bata Cluj project, we're going to talk about the next. We have the rent subsidy and the market acquisition. So a little bit about this project, which is the key of the presentation. So this is a rehousing project aimed at evicted Roma who live in Patară, the ghetto area. So the municipality designed this very complicated institutional apparatus, which is presided by the mayor of Cluj, and this apparatus is formed of the city of Cluj-Napoca and the neighboring villages. It's a program we started in 2014 with Norwegian grants, and maybe we're going to have a Bata Cluj free next. Initially, it was aimed to offer soft measures, but housing was added on the way due to pressures from many people.
2 minutes, Georgia, please.
Yeah, this is a housing-ready program, which is aimed at families who manage to behave properly in the ghetto, so they have an evaluation of that. Just to point out that there's no connection with the Informal Settlements law in Romania, which was adopted in 2019. The housing produced through this project is not public or social housing, but it's owned by this institutional mechanism. And around 8 million euros have been invested so far in the 2 projects, with some municipal contributions. So this means that there are around 70 rehoused families, many in the city, but many in the neighboring villages. And all of the housing units have been bought at market prices. So what are the policy effects of this rehousing projects? So we do have this great direct project output. We have 70 rehoused families, but then we have 2 very important questions. So when will the other 250 families be rehoused? And what about the rest of the people from Cluj, which is Cluj is this very, very expensive real estate market. And we see that public housing has been residualized. So it's meant to be for the very poor, which is not part of the housing law at the moment, but it's something that the municipality instrumentalized with a very clear objective in mind, to protect the private housing market. This is it. So what we argue for against this real estate speculatory and extractivist practices, which feed on housing needs of most people, we argue that public housing as a general accessible mechanism to most wage earners is a proven mainstream, effective, inclusive and cheaper housing justice mechanism. So this is it. Thank you for the moment, maybe more in the discussion part.
Thank you, Georgia. We'll surely discuss more in the debate part of the event. But now I will move on and invite Misha from Bucharest to take the floor. 7 minutes, Misha.
Yes, hello everyone. 7 minutes and some spare, please. Okay, so I hope now, yeah, okay. Okay, it's all good. Okay, so I'll be very, very hasty. So, yeah, I'll skip my presentation. I'll start directly with the group I'm part of. So the Common Front for Housing Rights that was formed in 2013 in Bucharest, Romania, as a group to fight against evictions and to fight for housing rights for all. In 2019, alongside the Bloc for Housing, a national coalition for housing rights activists, of which Quest Social acum, Social Housing Now, is part of. We made a series of observations, expressed our concerns regarding on a draft bill for a proposal to define informal settlements and to create the legal framework for their inventory and dissolution through regulation. But since then, we have had a number of cases in which we actually use the arguments and requirements that the law sets to stop or delay forced evictions. Last year, with Romania, another colleague from Bloc for Housing, we researched an informal settlement area that concluded with a report forwarded to the local administration of Bucharest Sector 1. The presentation will show you the legislation in Romania on informal settlements, and will follow some relevant aspects in this regard. Then I will present very briefly 3 cases we worked on that will underscore the problems we have encountered. So, the bill I mentioned previously was passed into a 151 law from 2019, which actually modified the law for spatial planning and land management. This law provided legal means for inventorying, legalizing, and dismantling such settlements, which can be isolated or not from the body of a city, town, or village. The law states that an informal settlement is defined by the number of units, the property rights, and the risk of social exclusion definition you can see on your screen. The law also states the terms of relocation as an alternative for formalization that is having property rights, access to infrastructure, and conforming to building regulation. But these relocation terms comprise of social housing or rebuilding on proper, risk-free equipped land. But in the case that social housing is not available, alternative methods are allowed, such as temporary housing units, which most of the times are, as you know, probably shipping containers like. I should mention that in the initial bill, there was no protection against eviction and no protection for those lacking financial means for legalization. There was just procedures for legalization for those who could access some kind of support. In the final form, although proposed by the Ministry of Development, additional social protection amendments were made. But the implementation of this legal frame was lags behind. Only about 200 local authorities from about 3,000 reporting to the ministry the informal settlements on their territory. So we have some statistical data that states that at national level, we have like 393 informal settlements that are sheltering almost 72,000 people. However, it should be noted that not all of administrative territorial units submitted data, nor do we have a very clear picture of how the data was collected. For example, in Bucharest, 88 informal settlements were reported, but only sectors 2 and 3 out of 6 sectors filled in the necessary data sheets for centralization. The same report shows that using another definition of informal settlements, in 2014, the numbers were around 43,000 households and 64,000 families. And at the same time, only 53% of the administrative territorial units provided information. So the actual number is much, much higher. So how do we actually work with this law? Our colleagues from In the case of Mizil, the first case, our colleagues from Romania are the ones mobilizing in this case. It's a small city with a large neighborhood of Roma and mixed ethnic households, which developed over the last decades on public land. The new mayor now wants to partially demolish the informal settlements and want to use the land to build new social housing. Romania, together with us, militate for the following relocation solution: that all households built before 2016 with older dwellers to be formalized on site with full support from the local state, and the more recent self-built households to be relocated in future social housing buildings, which were promised by the mayor. We militate for relocation only when the promised social housing buildings are completed, and no eviction and no demolition before that. So public social housing first. Second, in Sector 6 from Bucharest, an informal settlement was formed by self-built housing inside the ruins of a factory at the outskirts of the city. The local authorities want to demolish the ruins, develop a new complex of social housing right on site, and relocate the households there. But a few other hundreds of households from all across the sector are still on the general waiting list for social housing. So the
Misha,
dilemma,
1 minute, please. 1 minute.
So the dilemma arises how local authorities will deliver these new social housing units. Should the informal households bypass the waiting list? We argued that for these new social housing units to be distributed on the general social housing list, but to have an additional priority criteria. Okay, so we also argue that the different social categories that are eligible for social housing should not be put in a position or in competition for social housing because of the scarcity of public housing, but rather the local and central authorities must have policies and programs that are clear, well-funded, and fast-paced for public social housing. The last one, I'll skip right through to the conclusion. And I will say that there are myriads of situations in which informal settlements can be defined or on-site whatever. So the conclusion is that so
Maybe
it's quite difficult to condense this. I would say only that we have to stress out that the increase of public housing is the first priority for any real solution, not only for the most marginalized categories, but for a larger segment of population, as means to control the housing cost burden that drives many people into debt and poverty in the context of capitalism. Okay. Thank you.
That's great, Misha. Thank you. I will invite now Georgi from Habitat for Humanity International.
Yes, hi everyone, and
hi.
Thanks for the invitation, and I will share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Can you? Okay.
Yes, yes.
So these are, you see this slide templates. This presentation was prepared for the conference last week in Brussels, the annual EU Roma conference, where we presented some of these thoughts. And I just using the same slides. First, I want to highlight that there is these are the most recent research we found and used for our own work, and also we published our own research recently with a group of researchers on the housing of Roma in Central and Eastern Europe. And probably many of you are familiar with this chart from the Fundamental Rights Agency latest report, which shows the striking difference between the housing situation of the Roma and non-Roma all over Europe, and it's clear that this huge difference is a result of a systemic discrimination and anti-Gypsyism all over Europe. Needless to say, I think you all know this. What our own research found in 9 countries, probably again, it's not super new to many of you. What I want to just highlight here is that the last 2 of this list, the conditioned passivity of the Roma communities. So I think we have a lot to work with the communities and help the Roma communities to empower them to understand what are their options and make informed decisions themselves. And then also a recent issue is the Roma refugees from Ukraine. There are 50,000 in Poland alone and a lot in Hungary, and the governments are treating these Roma refugees from Ukraine very differently than the other Ukrainian refugees. All our research showed that at least in Central and Eastern Europe, there are very few good practices for sustainable informal settlement upgrading or relocation program or disaggregation programs. There are a couple of small initiatives by NGOs or municipalities here and there, but it's very difficult to find a sustainable, good solution. Based on our research, we put together these principles as a skeleton of a new approach or strategy for Roma housing, and especially for informal settlements. And I just want to highlight the first 3. The do no harm principle is very important for us at Habitat, that sometimes it's better to do nothing than to go into a community and doing something of goodwill and then making more negative impact than good things. So I think it's very important that we should keep this in mind. The other 2 things I want to mention is housing and poverty reduction. We do believe as a housing NGO that providing good housing, it's a great factor in reducing poverty, and related to this, providing decent housing have a benefit on the economic situation of a family, and it can provide better livelihood options and everything related to that. And then empowered participation, I think, is key, that we shouldn't do any bigger intervention either for relocation or in situ upgrading or helping people moving out from some families moving out of the community without really consulting the community and helping them, that they should make informed decisions. We shouldn't make decisions on behalf of the Roma communities. And some practical examples from our work, especially in North Macedonia, our colleagues are engaged in urbanizing Roma informal settlements in several towns all over North Macedonia. And we believe that this is the first important policy step to include the informal settlements in the urban territory of a town or city, because that would open up the opportunity to have access to all kinds of public services and the opportunity to legalize illegally built dwellings or to stay legally on a piece of ground which wasn't originally yours. And also we believe that this urban planning should be done with including the Roma community. That's what we do in Macedonia, that we set up these local leadership groups and engage the Roma community members in the urban planning process. And what I showed you with these principles, our ambition is to come up with a Roma housing strategy first for the habitat organizations, but we want to develop it in a way that it could be a good guidance document for other organizations and for EU level advocacy too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Georgi. I will now pass the microphone to our last speaker, Florin Popa. Please, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Ioana, and I hope you can hear me and see me. So hello, everybody. Thanks so much for inviting me here, and thanks to all the speakers. So obviously, I'm the one staying between you and the discussion session and maybe some lunch. So I will try to be as brief as I can. In fact, I just want to highlight that there are different sources of support at EU level that can be used to address the challenges of informal settlements. And I'm representing one of these sources. It is called the Technical Support Instrument, the TSI. And we've been active in different European countries. What we do in a nutshell is that on the basis of a demand from member states, we can intervene and can mobilize the expertise available in different places. We can work with international organizations, with public or private institutions. Wherever the expertise is located, we can mobilize it and channel it to the member states. And I will give you a very brief example of what we did in Romania. So we had a TSI project that ran from 2022 to 2023 to address the governance model around informal settlements, and especially the articulation between the central and the local level in Romania. So this was a project implemented with the expertise of the World Bank, and we have worked with two beneficiary ministries in Romania, the Ministry for European Project and Investments and the Ministry of Development and Public Administration. So what was it? It was basically an attempt to address some of the issues around the system of integrated interventions for people living in informal settlements. So what these two ministries needed was first a better methodological framework for identifying informal settlements in most urgent need of intervention. So how do you prioritize interventions? And secondly, really working with the central, but especially with the local level on their capacity to plan and carry out interventions in informal settlements. So for the Ministry of European Investments and Projects, the priorities was basically to have a clearer system of prioritizing interventions from ESF+. As some of you might know, in Romania, there is quite a sizable amount from ESF+ that was marked for interventions for the regularization of 200 informal settlements. And these are accompanied by 100 million funds from ERDF for integrated interventions in such settlements. For the Ministry of Development, Public Works and Administration, the priority or the focus was more on the on facilitating the adoption of the National Housing Strategy, methodological guidance, the governance model around integrated intervention, and so on. So I won't get into details on what we actually did in the project, but I would like to share with you some of the, let's not call it lessons, but at least what I find most striking coming out of this project. And of course, I would be happy to reply to any questions or to respond by email, by phone to any requests for further information on this project. So first of all, when we're talking about informal settlements, we're talking about places in which there is an intersection of different forms of vulnerability. So we're talking about vulnerable populations. We're talking about Roma. We're talking about families that do not have access to public facilities, and in most cases they cannot really exercise their civic rights. They are far from schools, from hospitals. In many cases, the informal settlements itself is situated in a polluted area. So we try to organize the interventions, taking into account two basic options: in situ upgrading, regularization, and so on, and relocation if the risks cannot be addressed in situ. And what we have found is that there is a maze, a jungle of intervention, legal, technical, financial, that need to be addressed in an integrated fashion. So basically, one fancy way of expressing it is that there is a need for a whole government approach. So we had these two ministries on board, but actually what is needed is some sort of interministerial coordination mechanism that could ensure that these interventions, legal, technical, financial, are done in a coordinated fashion. What we also found is that trust and relationship building are absolutely essential for such interventions. There is no way of making decisions and actually going there and relocating people without first actually discussing with them, seeing how they see the situation, seeing what the problems are from their perspective, and then trying to somehow co-create the options for the future steps. The third thing that we found was essential is that there is a need for better coordination between the central and the local levels. Fortunately, in this project, I had I would say the privilege to see that the two ministries are open enough to invite mayors and NGOs that are active at local level, and to actually listen to them. So I saw people from the local level leading these workshops with a sense of being listened to and empowered. What we also found, and this I say from the perspective of the EU financing, is that there is some unclarity and lack of consistency when it comes to seeing the different investments available and what is available to address the problems of informal settlements. So this interministerial working group, or whatever other mechanism would be in place, would need to also take into account the financial aspects and see how the different programs available, ESF Plus, ERDF, the technical support instrument, and others would be complementary rather than overlapping. And I would just end this with a question, with an open question. That was a question that was actually at the core of our PSI project, but I would say it's a question that needs to be addressed in any other intervention from EU funds or from any other funds, and that is how to ensure political ownership. I mean, constant, sustained political ownership for changes that concern issues that never quite make it to the top of the political agenda. I mean, I don't have to tell you that informal settlements is not really what you would see in the media or on TV before elections. However, I mean, when we see that there is so much good practice at local level that can be somehow brought to the mainstream and somehow translated or scaled up in other communities, I think small interventions such as ours through the TSI can really have a major impact in going forward. So for us, from the TSI perspective, but also from many others of you, I think one open question is, well, we have provided this technical support for a while, for 1.5 years, but how to go forward, ensuring that the political ownership created at central and local level are sustainable, and that they can really be brought forward in order to use the results of the support, rather than finding out after 3, 4, or 5 years that the problems are still there, that the recommendations have not been addressed, and that basically we have to start from the same situation over again. So I would leave it here. Again, I would be very happy to engage with any of you that might like to know more about this project or about the TSI. Thank you.
Thank you, Florin, and thank you for all the other speakers for the great job. And now I would like to open the discussion. We will have about 20 minutes for that. Unfortunately, half of the time that we have planned, but this is how things go. Nothing is perfect. So I will check the chat for questions. Please submit your questions in the chat if you have any, but you can also raise your hand in case you want to make a direct intervention. And here is the first question, is for Florin. What mechanisms does the Commission have to ensure that the EU resources align with the principle of do no harm, particularly when it comes to the right to housing and the avoidance of forced evictions? So how would that be ensured?
Well,
and after Cecilia let us know that Jean would like to intervene. Yes, of course. Thank you. After Florin responds to the question.
Thank you for the question. So in our case, it's in the legal basis of how we operate. So usually when we select these projects on the basis of a demand from different countries, we look for a provider of expertise. And for instance, if we work with one international organization such as the World Bank or OECD, we make sure that the agreement that we have signed with that service provider will contain the relevant provisions on do no harm. So it's a legal obligation that we transfer to the service provider. And also we are involved throughout the project implementation. So whatever comes out of that project will also need to be validated by us, meaning that anything that is thought not to be in alignment with the do no harm principle will not be accepted. I cannot really speak on behalf of how ERDF or ESF operate, but I guess they have a very similar mechanism of ensuring that this is embedded in the legal mechanism.
Thank you. Jean, please go ahead. Will you speak in Romanian? Should I translate for you, or Cecilia will translate for you in case the interpretation channel, you have to switch it on again?
Dacă este mai bine, buongiorno, prima bună ziua la toată lumea care este în programul acesta. Și dacă e mai bine să traduc în românești, traduceți dumneavoastră în engleză, atunci vorbesc român.
Ok, așa voi face. Dacă v-ați putea limita la 1-2 minute, ar fi perfect. We have established that I will translate for him from Romanian. Maximum 1 or 2 minutes, please, to leave time for other questions. 1 minut sau 2 pentru a avea timp și pentru alte întrebări. Continuați.
Am început să filmez în campul rom, văzând că situația este abuzivă de poliția italiană și au făcut foarte multe neclarități. Eu aveam documente și puteam...
Doar o secundă să traduc. He's saying that he began to film in the Roma camp Lungostura Lazio, and he noticed how many illegal things the police was doing. Continuați, vă rog.
Faptul că eu aveam documente și nu puteau să-mi facă expulzare sau să mă amenințe cu ceva, de exemplu, cum expulzare care să dea o foaie de via în 5 zile, chestii de genere, eu am continuat să fac aceste filmate și am vrut să fac un film documentar să demonstrez ce se întâmplă în interiorul campului, pentru că eu sunt un locuitor din camp.
O clipă. He had all the papers, so the police had nothing on him to threaten him with expulsions, as it happens with other people in the camps. And so he wanted to make a documentary to show the world what was going on in the camp. Continuați, vă rog.
Deci nu erau numai romi în camp, erau și români, și persoane povere care nu aveau, sărace, care nu aveau unde locui. Deci nu... Erau chiar și italieni care locuiau noi în camp. În situația asta eu am fost de părere să facem un documentar, să demonstrăm ce se întâmplă în camp, pentru că vorba noastră contra vorba lor nu putem discuta, nu ne crede nimeni. Așa cu filmatele puteam să demonstrăm la veritate ce se întâmplă adevărat în camp.
Okay, o clipă. There were both Roma and non-Roma people in the camp, all of them poor. He wanted to make this movie that I invite you to check out on the link that Cecilia put in the chat, to prove that all that was happening there is true, because otherwise it would have been their word against the institution's word. Ai vreo întrebare anume, Jean? Ar trebui să lansăm discuția și către publicul mai larg.
Problema mea, deci dacă ar fi posibil, chestia asta se întâmplă din anii 64, dacă ar fi posibil, pentru că sunt copii născuți în campurile rom, care nu au încă documente, merg la școală, deci fără documente, neînregistrați nicăieri, nu se poate face o vizită medicală pentru că nu sunt documente. Ne-au dat case în afit, în schimb, nu ne-au lăsat să facem rezidență. Eu am trimis personal să facă rezidență la comună și a zis că noi suntem integrați provizoriu.
Okay, o clipă. There are still problems with their papers, even if the children go to school, they don't have papers. They have been told that they can get only temporary accommodation, and there is an ongoing problems with getting residence permits and papers. So that would be a very concrete issue that he, as a person that comes from a camp, still has after all these years. Jean, eu personal nu știu ce aș putea să-ți spun. Poate dacă vei lucra mai departe, dacă vei intra în contact cu persoanele din Roma sau cu alte persoane de la alte organizații locale, poate se poate rezolva ceva, dar ăsta nu este neapărat un context de a căuta răspunsuri la niște probleme foarte specifice, deși ele sunt extrem de relevante. I was just telling him that maybe he could get in touch with people from local organizations, that we cannot provide very concrete answers to very specific problems, unfortunately. But what he has been telling us is just to showcase the ongoing problems of exclusion that people coming from camps still have. Thank you. Mulțumesc pentru intervenție, Jean.
O mulțumesc mult și eu.
Și mulțumim pentru film. Thank you. If we can open the floor to other questions from the public. Okay, we have one question from Simona. She's asking this: from the government, is there any planned relocation projects as rental bases or any other approach for the dwellers of informal settlements? Simona, maybe you can give more details about that. To which country does your question refer? for Italy. I saw it.
Ioana,
Sorry,
it
you
was not
go.
for me. I was just copy pasting from earlier. It was from someone else. I don't know if they're still here and they want to verify.
Okay, sorry, I didn't
No
notice it. Apologies. Okay, I have my own list of questions. If nobody else wants to ask anything more, please, Georgi.
Just want to react to Simona's questions from a Central Eastern European perspective, that probably some of you, that there's some good government initiatives for rental options for the Roma in the Czech Republic, that there has been a rapid rehousing project in Brno first, and then it became a kind of government program, and then now there are several municipalities in Czech Republic which using ESF plus funding to provide rental options for Roma families. And also there are some initiatives to provide rental housing in the form of a social rental agency also in the Czech Republic. So I think they are spearheading rental options, at least in Central and Eastern Europe, for the Roma. Thank you.
Actually, concerning this, I wanted to ask you, because I'm guessing it's also a consequence of not allocating proper resources for an adequate rehousing component, and this also leads to approaches that center temporary or short-term solutions or market-based solutions. And I wanted to ask all of you, what do you think, how appropriate do you think these are to answer to complex issues that socially excluded people have, and that doesn't put them in a position to be able to sustain market rents in the long term. So I've heard so far from Italy, but also from Belgium and probably in other places too, this push towards market-based solutions from people from informal settlements. And what do you think about that?
If I could intervene. Okay, so what missed from my presentation, because I skipped this part, was that the fact that market-based solutions actually reinforces the market. So we have to look at the market also as an instrument of exclusion. So the what actually push people to the margin. So yes, we have informal settlements, but let's look at what economic system makes this happens, and of course have to look at in our times. But yes, we call this because in the case of Romania we have this rent aid or forms of support that people from informal settlements help with rent, with money to access rent from a public, from a private market. But this is also a form of auto relocation, because all the basically all of the responsibility of resolving these situations are put also on the shoulders of the people that are suffering from this.
Okay, anybody else has an input on this? Maybe from Rome. I was thinking, what do you think about this? Like, so channeling people in their rehousing solutions towards towards rental market, and how sustainable you think that is in comparison to social housing, maybe. Sorry, I don't want to put you on the spot, but just if you have an idea about this or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we were discussing with Mariangela, but very briefly, from our perspective, is of course urgent to find solutions for the people. And since we know that the public housing system in Rome is very limited, the capacity. Yeah, 6 or 7 evictions every day, and thousands of people without a house. Then, of course, we have to consider all possible solutions. And this plan we are currently involved in, there are different kinds of support that are also given to solutions that are not the public housing necessarily, that can be, of course, independent in case people can afford an independent rent, but also the problem. Yeah, the problem is systemical, because then the discrimination that Roma people face regards both housing access. So even if they want to have a rent, even if they have the possibility to rent a house, then it's very difficult that the owners would like to actually rent house to Roma community, and then also in regarding work inclusion. So this is all the challenges that we have to face, because even in the moment in which we do have the resources, or the family have the resources, then we also need to challenge all the problems that comes from the stigmatization, discrimination, and hate that go towards the Roma community. Yeah, so just the final sentence, what we're trying to achieve and contribute to is to have this multi-stakeholder approach in which everyone is involved towards a systemic change. So not just the institution, not just the third sector, not just the civil society, but all together to try to invert this oppression. Yeah, of course, multi-level, involving school, civil society, and community in general. But it's very hard. But this is what we try.
Thank you, Diletta. We also have another question for George and Misha. You both argue for more public housing as the solution for people living in informal settlements. Could you say a bit more about the kind of additional allocation criteria you think are needed to ensure actual effective access for people in most need? Do you see no role for targeted rental assistance or targeted service interventions?
Yeah, so we have already seen many experiments with this, and we see that they work only at a symbolic level in terms of numbers, particularly, and so additional allocation criteria. So what we need at the moment is to increase the public housing fund. This is very simple. We've had more than 10 years of debates on this, and we every time we arrive at the same conclusion. This is the only feasible solution, which was demonstrated. Moreover, we have a history we have a socialist history which proves very, very clearly that public housing is a solution to ensure housing rights. That's very clear. And every time we go back to that, every time we analyze a new policy proposal, it just most, if not all, seem like patches that might solve a bit of the problem at a very local level, to a very low number of recipients, and this is not something that it's a solution for the existing situation. So we could have, and our impression, let me add this. So rental assistance, the rent subsidy in Cluj-Napoca. Our argument was that sure, there's an urgent need to provide any kind of solution. producing new social housing at the moment, constructing, that's a multi-year affair. So that's not going to be able to solve very urgent needs. But if you start a rent subsidy program without any connection with the increase of public housing fund, and you only address it for 3 years, that's not a solution. That's just postponing a solution. And it's not even, yeah, it's just fitting into the rental market, which is highly unregulated. So we need much more for a rental subsidy or rental assistance to actually provide any kind of meaningful solution. We need regulation of the rental market, which is totally unregulated. 70–80% of the rental markets are not registered, so you can't really operate in that. There's no rent ceiling, there's no rental protections and anything like that. So if you set up a rental subsidy program, you just push people into the very racist and classist rental market, which is, I'm sure, is not just the case in Romania. I'm sure that in different ways is most of the same in all over Europe.
Thank you, George. About that, I was also thinking of a question for Sarah or Celia regarding this issue of, okay, how do you assign public housing, because it's a very long list of people that are waiting for public housing, and how do you prioritize people from informal settlements as having some kind of housing emergency, but without adding to social conflicts about people getting ahead of the list. So I was wondering if, because we've already seen that there is problem with that in Romania and in Italy, and I was wondering about your case in France. I don't know if my question was clear or not.
I was wondering if Sarah is still here on net.
Sorry.
Could you repeat the question, maybe, please?
Should I repeat the question, Sarah?
Yeah, please. Sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering about this. How can we prioritize on social housing list people that have housing emergency because they live in informal settlements, but without steering up for additional social conflict around people getting ahead of the line and so on. So how do we conflict that also often has a very racist component, right? As we have discussed in the case of Italy and Romania as well.
I think that in France, the main problematics is the access to common rights, has social benefits, and access to heirs and all the, how to say that, just the common rights, because we can see that if you are a person in a common shelter system, you can access to social security and all the benefits that you can access to. And now in the population living in slums, it's more difficult. So I think that the first step is the access to those rights. And then we have a system in France that organizes the allocation of the social housing with a system of points. And the more you have points, the more you can access in priority to the allocation of social housing. And maybe we have discussion about the effectivity of this system, but it allows to prioritize some situation. If you have kids, if you have difficulties to access to heirs, if you have things like that, and you live in the slum, you are more priority in a biggest priority than someone who will be evicted but still live in a better housing. So I think that this system of points can help, but it's not enough. We need social support to have an overview of the situation of each person. And we have, I know that in Montpellier, for example, there is occasion to adapt every solution to the situation, the particular situation of each person, as we cannot see the people living in informal settlement as a whole, but it is a lot of situation really different, the one from each other. So it's really important to have a solution adapted to the family or to the situation. And sometimes it's not just social housing, because, for example, there is a problem of administrative issues, for example, so they cannot access to social housing. So we have to promote some specific solution for those people that cannot access directly to social housing. But it has to be some solution really with dignity and social support. I hope it gives you an answer to this question.
Thank you, Sarah. We are past the announced hour for the end of our discussion, but just to keep you 2 more minutes, because I would like to still ask Jeanne and Manu a question about what is still going on now with the evictions from the municipal housing in Torino, if you are still there.
Okay, yes. Ok. Allora, a Torino adesso appunto c'è risultato di 10 anni di sgomberi.
So in Turin now, like, we are facing the consequences of 10 years of evictions of Roma informal settlements and also formal ones.
Purtroppo l'Italia, che era conosciuto come il paese dei campi, a Torino, ma penso non solo a Torino, anche Milano e in altre città, si è formato in seguito a tutti questi sgomberi quello che è chiamato anche popolo dei camper.
So Italy was known as the country of Roma camps, and what is we are facing now in Torino, but also in Roma and in Milan, is that now the people are actually living in vans. So in Italian we say camper. So from campi to camper, people are living in the streets in vans, basically.
Con costi altissimi, ci sono persone che hanno perso, ci sono stati incidenti, aggressioni, bambini che hanno avuto degli incidenti, è una situazione molto complessa e difficile.
This means that people are more vulnerable concerning possible aggressions in the streets, also accidents like car accidents for children living in the vans. So the situation is really extremely dangerous for people living in the streets.
Allo stesso tempo molte persone dal 2019-2020 mandate via dai campi o che vivevano in camper hanno occupato case popolari.
So the important thing to say is that people who were evicted from the informal settlements and also who are harassed by police in the streets decided, in particular in the last 2 to 4 years, to occupy public housing illegally. So because in Italy, in Torino especially, we have a lot of apartments of public houses which are not, let's say, renovated by the public administration. So they are left empty. And so people decided to occupy illegally these apartments.
Ok, e a Torino il discorso è che in questo momento mancano tantissime case popolari, ci sono circa 17.000 domande e ne assegnano 350 quando va bene, 400 all'anno.
So we are in Italy and in Torino especially, there is a public housing crisis since many years. Just consider that this year there were in Torino, in Piemonte, 17,000 requests for houses and only 350 were actually allocated.
e discorso pubblico e la municipalità dà completamente, come dire, la colpa del fatto che manchino le case popolari alle persone, famiglie rom e non rom, che hanno preso le case vuote, non ristrutturate negli ultimi anni.
So now the mediatic and institutional discourse is basically giving to the Roma and non-Roma people who decided to occupy the empty apartments the guilt of basically the housing crisis in Turin. So they're saying that the problem is the people who occupied the empty houses and not the fact that it's like since many years that there are no investments in public housing in Torino and elsewhere in Italy.
E l'ultima cosa che volevo dire è che alla fine degli anni 90 c'è stata una richiesta di case popolari da parte di famiglie, per lo più provenienti dalla Bosnia, per avere accesso alle case popolari.
So the last thing Manu wants to say is that at the end of the 90s, there has been a request by Roma people to access public housing in Torino.
E quando l'Agenzia delle Case Popolari si è resa conto di queste domande, quindi su base razzista e classista, il governo della Regione Piemonte ha cambiato il regolamento per l'accesso alle case popolari e ha escluso le famiglie, le persone che vivevano in campi perché non erano in emergenza abitativa.
So when the basically institution administering the public housing in Piemonte noticed that there was this request by Roma and non-Roma people living in the informal settlements, the Piemonte region changed the criteria for accessing the public houses, excluding people living in these informal settlements, saying that it was not an emergency. And so they were excluded on a racial basis, basically, from this possibility.
Thank you so much for this overview. I think some of the more historical issues were covered also in the complaint that Elisa put together at Amnesty International for in their strategic litigation case. I realize it has been a lot of information and a lot of perspectives from different levels, from grassroots to national organizations and networks. And just to sum it up, I think it's really important to have all of them together to show how broad and complex this issue is, an issue that we don't discuss so often, unfortunately, but that we should discuss more also in the context of new announced EU policy on housing that we think should address the living conditions and the housing conditions of most excluded people also in the housing market. And this includes people that are forced to live in informal settlements for lack of better options. And I think one question that we should still have in mind, maybe think about it like food for thought, is how should we change the situation, like the housing policy and the approach towards housing and informal settlements in such a way that informal settlements are not recreated anew over and over across our cities. So this takes a more a systemic approach on the part of municipalities, but also national authorities. Otherwise, we will continue to have them because people end up constructing them because of lack of better solutions. So thank you so much, all of you. I realize I overstretched a bit with the number of presentations, but I hope it has been useful for you to learn about other contexts and maybe pick up some networking after this. And also useful to know about urgent situations that are going on right now in parts of Europe and be responsive to them. If you don't have anything urgent to add, I would close the meeting here, and thank you all so much again for all your input.